The morning sky over Manhattan erupted in crimson fire as massive warships tore through the clouds like ancient gods descending from Olympus. Each vessel stretched for miles, their hulls scarred by the battles of 1,000 worlds, their surfaces gleaming with an otherworldly metal that seemed to drink in sunlight and spit back terror. Admiral Korath stood motionless on the bridge of the flagship Decimator, his cybernetic eye glowing red in the dim lighting. The scars running down his face told the story of 3 centuries of conquest, each mark a world that had fallen before his might. His lips curved into a predatory smile as he watched the primitive blue world spinning helplessly below. "Status. Report," he barked, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "All battle groups in position, Admiral," responded his tactical officer. A hulking creature with 6 arms and skin like polished obsidian, fear projection arrays are online. Terror amplifiers at maximum output. The humans are completely surrounded. Korath's smile widened. This was always his favorite moment, the calm before the storm. It's the last seconds of a species' ignorance before they understood their true place in the galaxy. He had perfected this routine across countless systems. The Zephyrians had wept when they saw his ships. The crystalline beings of Alpha Centauri had literally shattered from terror. The warrior clans of Proxima had thrown down their weapons and begged for mercy. "Activate the terror broadcast," he commanded, his voice echoing across the bridge like thunder. "Let these primitives understand their fate." The communication array hummed to life, its alien technology instantly hijacking every electronic device on Earth. Television screens flickered and died. Where the white light? We're waiting with. I'm like, well, wait, we're white. I ended. We're all like, wait a while, or I where I would crack or the crack. Imposing figure. Radio stations fell silent, then crackled with his amplified voice. Every smartphone, every tablet, every smart TV all became conduits for his message of doom in Times Square. The massive LED billboards went dark for a heartbeat, then exploded. With the image of Admiral Korath's scarred face, 50 feet tall and radiating menace, his holographic form materialized above the London Eye, casting shadows across the Thames. In Tokyo, his voice boomed from every speaker in the city, drowning out the morning rush hour. Humans of Earth. Korath's voice carried across the planet, mechanically amplified to strike fear into the hearts of billions. "I am Admiral Korath of the Galactic Dominion. For 3,000 years, we have swept across the stars, bringing order to chaos, discipline to disorder." He paused dramatically, letting the weight of his words sink in. This was the moment when civilizations typically began to crack one. The reality of their insignificance crashed down upon them like a tidal wave. "Your world has been marked for integration into our empire. You have exactly 24 hours to surrender unconditionally or face total annihilation. Your pathetic weapons are useless against our technology. Your military forces are insects. Before our might. Your resistance is then something happened that had never occurred in 3 millennia of galactic conquest." The humans laughed, not the nervous, hysterical laughter of beings on the edge of madness, not the bitter laughter of the defeated or the desperate giggles of the condemned. This was something else entirely deep, genuine. Belly-shaking laughter that seemed to bubble up from the very soul of humanity. In a coffee shop in Seattle, a barista named Tom nearly dropped his espresso machine as he burst into uncontrollable giggles. "Oh my God, did this guy seriously just do the 'your resistance is futile' bit? What is this? Star Trek? The bad fan fiction?" Across the continent, in a Manhattan office building, marketing executive Sarah clutched her sides as tears streamed down her face. Linda, come look at this." This alien dude is literally doing the most cliché villain speech ever. It's like every Saturday morning cartoon bad guy rolled into one. The laughter spread like wildfire across social media. Within minutes, #AlienCringe was trending worldwide. Someone had already created a TikTok account called Discount Darth Vader, featuring Korath's image with silly filters. A teenager in Ohio had auto-tuned his speech into a dance remix that was gaining 10,000 views per minute. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, monitoring Earth's communications from the alien flagship, stared at his readings in complete disbelief. His multiple eyes blinked in sequence as wave after wave of human responses flooded his screens. Sir ... They're making jokes about us, something called memes. And sir, they're going viral. Admiral Korath's expression shifted from confident dominance to confused rage. Jokes? What do you mean jokes, sir? They're comparing you to something called every Beam movie villain ever. They're saying your speech was cringeworthy and trying too hard. One human posted a video of himself recreating your speech with a deeper voice and dramatic hand gestures, and it has been viewed 40 million times in the last 10 minutes. The bridge fell silent, except for the nervous chittering of junior officers. In 3,000 years of conquest, Admiral Korath had never encountered a response like this. Fear he understood, rage he could handle. Desperate resistance was expected, but laughter? This was uncharted territory. Show me, he commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a compilation of human reactions. A news anchor in London was struggling to maintain professional composure while discussing the delightfully retro approach to galactic intimidation. A late-night comedian in Los Angeles was already performing a stand-up routine about aliens who apparently learned villainy from 1980s cartoons. But it was the children's reactions that truly bewildered the alien commander. Instead of cowering in terror, kids across the planet were imitating his voice, striking dramatic poses and collapsing in giggles. One particularly viral video showed a 6-year-old girl in pigtails declaring in a squeaky voice, "I am Admiral Korath. Your resistance is ... really silly." The Admiral's cybernetic eye flickered as he processed this unprecedented development. Every calculation, every strategic model, every psychological profile he had studied suggested that humans should be paralyzed with fear by now. Instead, they were treating the Galactic Dominion like entertainment. Sir Morrison continued, his voice trembling. There's more. They're analyzing our ships on their social media platforms. Military experts are calling our design unnecessarily spiky and compensatory. Someone has created a chart comparing our invasion fleet to what they call every evil spaceship trope from science fiction. The implications hit Korath like a physical blow. News of this incident would spread across the galaxy within hours. If word got out that humans, primitive, technologically inferior humans, had responded to the Galactic Dominion with laughter, it would undermine their authority across 14 star systems. But how do you wage war against an enemy that finds you amusing? How do you conquer a species that responds to your greatest threats with entertainment? For the first time in his long career, Admiral Korath found himself facing a tactical problem he had never encountered before. The humans weren't just laughing at his threats. They were laughing at everything he represented. Somehow that simple act of defiance was more terrifying than any weapon they could have deployed. Little did the Admiral know. This was just the beginning of humanity's most unexpected victory. The MIT emergency. Command Center buzzed with chaotic energy as Dr. Rebecca Becky Thompson wiped tears of laughter from her eyes, her hand trembling as she reached for her coffee mug. The alien broadcast flickered on the wall-mounted screens for what had to be the 15th time in the past hour. And somehow, it just kept getting funnier. "Oh my God," she gasped between breaths, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. "Did you guys catch that little shoulder shimmy he does right before he says total annihilation? It's like he's channeling every Beam movie villain from the 1950s around her." The hastily assembled first contact team was in complete disarray, not the kind you'd expect when facing an alien invasion. Colonel Mike Stevens, still wearing His dress uniform from the emergency Pentagon briefing 3 hours earlier had loosened his tie and was doubled over his laptop, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Becky, look at this," he wheezed, pointing at the screen. "Did you see his little cape and the way he did that dramatic pause? Your resistance is ... single quotes. Dude, it's like he learned villainy from comic books. My 12-year-old nephew could deliver a more convincing threat." The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on any of them. Here they were, the planet's top experts in xenobiology, military strategy, and interstellar communication. And they were laughing so hard they could barely function. Wasn't that exactly what made humans so dangerous? It's their ability to find humor in the darkest moments. Communications specialist Lisa Parker, her auburn hair disheveled from running her hands through it, pulled up her tablet with shaking fingers. The explosion of social media content was unlike anything she'd seen in her 15 years of monitoring global communications. Guys, #AlienCringe is trending worldwide. Someone already auto-tuned his speech and turned it into a dance remix. And there's a Twitter account called Discount Darth Vader that just hit 2 million followers in the last hour. She swiped through the endless stream of content, each post more creative than the last. Look at this, mom in Wisconsin recreated his entire speech using her kids' action figures. A teenager in South Korea made a K-pop version. And this. Oh my god, this is a side-by-side comparison of Korath's speech with every classic movie villain monologue ever recorded. The secured line crackled to life, cutting through their laughter like a knife. "Dr. Thompson, this is General Harrison." Rebecca straightened immediately, her scientific training kicking in despite the surreal circumstances. "Yes, General. Status report. The Joint Chiefs have made a decision. You're going up to their ship. We need someone with your expertise in xenobiology and, well, your ability to keep a straight face in unusual circumstances." Rebecca glanced around the room at her colleagues, all still struggling to contain their amusement. "General, with all due respect, I'm not sure anyone could keep a straight face around these guys. They're like a Saturday Night Live sketch come to life. Try not to laugh at them, ... Too much. The general's voice carried a hint of his own suppressed amusement. "We still don't know what they're capable of when they're angry. But here's the thing about humans. We've always been at our best when facing the impossible." Rebecca straightened her blazer, her mind already shifting into diplomatic mode, despite the giggles still bubbling up from her chest. "Copy that, General." "But, sir, if they do that dramatic villain voice again, I make no promises." As she ended the call, the weight of the moment settled over the room. This wasn't just about first contact anymore. This was about the fundamental nature of human resilience. How many species across the galaxy had cowered before this same theatrical display? How many civilizations had fallen not to superior firepower, but to their own fear? Meanwhile, 17 miles above Earth's surface, Admiral Korath paced the bridge of the Decimator like a caged predator. His cybernetic eye flickered with rage as report after report flooded in from his monitoring stations. The humans weren't just unafraid, they were treating the Galactic Dominion like entertainment. "Sir?" Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison's voice quavered as he delivered the latest intelligence. "The humans have created something called reaction videos to our broadcast. Military analysts are calling our invasion fleet unnecessarily dramatic and lacking in tactical subtlety. 1. Human described our ships as what happens when you let a teenager design spaceships after watching many anime shows. The bridge fell silent, except for the nervous chittering of junior officers. In 3,000 years of conquest, no species had ever dared to mock the Galactic Dominion. Fear was their currency, terror their most effective weapon. But what do you do when your enemy finds you ridiculous? Show me the worst of it, Korath," commanded, his scarred face twisting with barely contained fury. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a compilation that would haunt his nightmares for cycles to come. A late-night comedian in Los Angeles was performing a devastating impression of his speech, complete with dramatic cape flourishes and an absurdly deep voice. The audience was in hysterics, but it was the comedian's final line that cut deepest. "You know what's really scary? The fact that this guy probably practiced this speech in the mirror for hours. But it wasn't just the comedians, military experts. We're dissecting his tactics on news programs. pointing out every cliché, every predictable element of his approach. Classic intimidation psychology, one analyst explained to millions of viewers. Textbook stuff, really. The problem is, it only works if your target hasn't seen every science fiction movie ever made. The most devastating blow came from an unexpected source, children. Schools across the planet had turned the alien broadcast into a teaching moment. About public speaking, with kids critiquing Korath's delivery, his word choice, even his posture. "He's trying too hard," observed a 10-year-old girl in Ohio, her video going viral within minutes. Good villains don't need to tell you they're scary. They just are. Korath's reputation, built on the terror of countless species across 14 star systems, was crumbling under the weight of human humor. Every conquered world was watching the same feeds, seeing the same reactions. The crystalline beings of Zephyria, who had surrendered without firing a shot, were now questioning why they had been so afraid. The warrior clans of Proxima were sending encrypted messages asking if the Terran tactic could be replicated. "Sir," Morrison continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something else. The humans they're offering constructive criticism. Military forums are discussing how we could have made our invasion more effective. They're treating it like a case study in how not to intimidate an advanced civilization." The Admiral's cybernetic eye flickered dangerously. This was worse than resistance. This was humiliation on a galactic scale. But how do you wage war against an enemy that turns your greatest strength into their entertainment? As he watched the endless stream of human creativity, memes, videos, songs, and art, all mocking his carefully crafted image, Korath began to understand something that chilled him to his core. The humans weren't just laughing at his threats. They were laughing at everything he represented. And in that laughter, he heard the sound of an empire beginning to crack. The question was no longer whether humanity would surrender. The question was whether the galactic dominion would survive the encounter with a species that had weaponized joy itself. Little did anyone know, the real battle was just beginning. ... The teleportation chamber aboard the Decimator hummed with otherworldly energy as molecules reassembled themselves into human form. Rebecca Thompson felt the familiar tingle of matter reconstruction fade as she materialized on the alien flagship. Her MIT credentials badge still somehow perfectly aligned on her blazer, despite having been broken. Down to quantum particles just seconds before, the chamber doors hissed open with mechanical precision, revealing a corridor that screamed intimidating spaceship so loudly it might as well have come with a user manual. Dark metallic walls, pulsing red lights, what appeared to be completely unnecessary steam vents, created an atmosphere that was clearly designed to strike fear into visiting dignitaries. Rebecca had to bite her lip to keep from smiling. It was like walking onto the set of every sci-fi B movie ever made. Two towering guards, their armor bristling with spikes and glowing panels, escorted her through corridors lined with what could only be described as menacing decor. Seriously, who needs that many skull-shaped fixtures on a spaceship? Rebecca found herself wondering if there was an entire alien interior design industry dedicated to maximum intimidation aesthetics.
Ow.
The bridge doors opened with a dramatic whoosh because, of course they didn't. Rebecca stepped into the nerve center of galactic conquest. The space was vast, dimly lit, and filled with the kind of ominous humming that movie sound engineers love. Dozens of alien officers hunched over control panels, their various tentacles, claws, and appendages working with practiced efficiency, and there, sitting at the center of it all like a villain, fresh from central casting, was Admiral Korath himself. Up close, he was both more and less impressive than his holographic projection had suggested. More impressive because he was genuinely massive. Easily 7 feet tall with muscles that suggested he could bench press a small planet. Less impressive because everything about him seemed calculated for maximum dramatic effect. The cape wasn't just a cape, it was a flowing, floor-length cape that somehow managed to billow dramatically in the recycled air of the spaceship. His armor wasn't just protective gear, it was an elaborate sculpture of spikes, plates, and glowing elements that probably took an hour to put on each morning. "Human," Korath growled. his voice artificially deepened by his helmet's modulator until it resembled the sound of rocks being ground together in a cement mixer. You stand before the instruments of your world's destruction. Tremble before thee. Oh, you're still doing the voice thing? Rebecca interrupted, her professional composure cracking despite her best efforts. The words slipped out before she could stop them, followed by a giggle that echoed embarrassingly in the sudden silence of the bridge. The Admiral's mandibles clicked in genuine confusion, a sound that was surprisingly similar to someone cracking their knuckles. Voice thing? What is voice thing? Rebecca gestured vaguely at his elaborate helmet setup. The voice modulator. That's actually kind of sweet. Like, you're really committed to the bit. Do you practice in the mirror? Because the delivery is very consistent. Bit. What is bit? The confusion in Korath's artificially deepened voice was palpable. Around the bridge, alien officers exchanged glances that somehow managed to convey bewilderment across multiple species. The whole evil galactic overlord performance, very retro, very theatrical. She gestured at his elaborate armor, taking in the unnecessary spikes, the glowing panels, the cape that seemed to have its own wind machine. How long does it take to put all that on in the morning? Like, seriously, do you have people who help you into it? Because those shoulder plates look heavy. The question hung in the air like a social media post that accidentally reveals too much. Several junior officers suddenly found their control panels absolutely fascinating, while others began that nervous chittering that apparently transcended species barriers. Commander Daniel Walsh, his insectoid features twitching with what Rebecca was beginning to recognize as irritation, stepped forward on his 6 legs. His compound eyes reflected the bridge's dramatic lighting as he attempted to restore some semblance of dignity to the proceedings. "Dr. Thompson, is it?" His voice carried the kind of clipped authority that suggested he was used to being taken seriously. Your species' cavalier attitude toward annihilation is ... unusual. Are you not aware of our military capabilities? Do you not understand the fate that awaits your world? But here's where Rebecca's training as a xenobiologist really kicked in. She'd spent years studying alien psychology. She was beginning to recognize something fascinating about this entire interaction. These beings weren't just trying to intimidate humanity, they were following a script, playing roles they'd perfected over millennia of conquest. She pulled out her phone, fingers dancing across the screen until she found what she was looking for. "Oh, we're aware, it's just... Look, Danny, can I call you Danny? You guys are trying so hard to be scary that it's actually endearing." The casual nickname hit Walsh like a physical blow in 3,000 years of galactic conquest. No one had ever called him Danny. The informality was so unexpected, so fundamentally human, it seemed to short-circuit his entire intimidation protocol. Rebecca turned the phone screen toward him, revealing a meme that had gone viral just hours earlier, Korath's face superimposed. Over a crying toddler with the caption, "When your evil overlord's speech gets interrupted." It's like watching a community theater production of Space Dictators, the musical. You know what I mean? The bridge fell silent except for the nervous chittering of junior officers and the ambient hum of alien technology. But it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of a group of beings who had never encountered this particular form of resistance before. Think about it. How do you terrorize someone who finds you amusing? How do you conquer a species that treats your greatest threats like entertainment? The Galactic Dominion had built their entire empire on fear. But what happens when fear becomes laughter? Admiral Korath's cybernetic eye flickered as he processed this unprecedented situation. His tactical computers, designed to analyze military threats and strategic weaknesses, had no programming for dealing with an enemy who responded to intimidation with constructive criticism. You mock us," he said finally, his voice modulator crackling with what might have been uncertainty. "Not mock," Rebecca corrected, her tone gentle but firm. "It's more like constructive feedback. Look, I get what you're going for here. The dramatic entrance, the threatening speeches, the whole resistance is futile thing. It's a solid approach, very classic. But maybe it's time to update the playbook. The galaxy has changed. Species are more sophisticated now. We've seen this routine before. The implications of her words rippled through the bridge like a shockwave. If the humans were right, if their intimidation tactics had become outdated, predictable, even laughable, then what did that mean for the future of galactic conquest? As Rebecca stood there, surrounded by the instruments of humanity's supposed destruction, she realized something profound. She wasn't just representing Earth in this first contact scenario. She was demonstrating something uniquely human. The ability to find hope and humor in the darkest moments, to turn fear into laughter, to transform threats into opportunities for connection. But the real question remained. How would an empire built on terror respond when faced with an enemy that refused to be afraid? The answer would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of the entire galaxy. The galactic communication network that had carried the Dominion's propaganda for 3 millennia suddenly found itself overwhelmed with an entirely different kind of content. Within hours of Rebecca's encounter aboard the Decimator, bootleg recordings of human comedy shows were spreading across the galaxy faster than Imperial propaganda had ever traveled. On the crystalline world of Zephyria, beings who had spent centuries living in terror of the Galactic Dominion gathered around their quantum communication arrays, watching in stunned silence as human comedians dissected their oppressors with surgical precision. The late-night television clips showed hosts delivering devastating impressions of Admiral Korath's dramatic speeches, complete with exaggerated cape flourishes and artificially deepened voices. "Look at this guy," comedian Jake Martinez had said on his show just hours after the first contact. His impression of Korath so spot-on that Zephyrion crystals literally resonated with laughter. He's got more spikes on his armor than a medieval torture chamber and somehow thinks that makes him scary. "Dude, you're not intimidating, you're a walking safety hazard." The crystalline beings, who communicated through harmonic vibrations, found themselves producing sounds they had never made before, the resonant equivalent of laughter. For the first time in their recorded history, they were mocking their conquerors instead of cowering from them. But it wasn't just Zephyria. Across 14 star systems, species that had fallen before the Dominion's theatrical might were suddenly seeing their oppressors through human eyes. The warrior clans of Proxima, who had surrendered without firing a shot, were now sharing memes about unnecessarily spiky architecture and dramatic entrances that served no tactical purpose. On the oceanic world of Aquatica, the aquatic inhabitants had developed their own versions of human comedy shows, with bioluminescent displays that recreated Korath's speeches to devastating comedic effect. Even the hive-minded collective of Beetlejuice had begun producing what could only be described as group comedy. With millions of voices harmonizing in satirical unison, Admiral Korath found himself in a situation that no military academy in the galaxy had prepared him for. Sitting in his private quarters aboard the Decimator, surrounded by the trophies of 1,000 conquered worlds, he stared at the holographic display showing the galactic communication feeds. Every channel, every frequency, every data stream was flooded with human-inspired mockery of everything he represented. The report he had to file to High Command was unlike anything in the military archives. How do you explain to your superiors that a species that hadn't achieved interstellar travel had somehow made the Galactic Dominion a laughingstock across 14 star systems? The humans have weaponized. "Ridicule, my lord," he reported to the Supreme Chancellor's hologram, his voice stripped of its usual artificial enhancement. The words felt strange coming from his mandibles, never in his 3-century career had he needed to use the phrase weaponized ridicule in an official military report. "Their entire culture appears to find our established protocols ... amusing. They have created something called content that spreads faster than our propaganda networks. Sir, they're not just unafraid, they're teaching other species to be unafraid." The Supreme Chancellor's holographic form flickered with what might have been disbelief. The leader of the Galactic Dominion was a being of immense power and ancient wisdom, having ruled for over a millennium. Worlds trembled at the mention of his name. Entire civilizations had built religions around their fear of his judgment. His response was a long pause that seemed to stretch across the void of space itself. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of an empire beginning to crack. "Show me these reaction videos they have created." The main display in the Chancellor's throne room lit up with a compilation that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Human teenagers were recreating Dominion invasion protocols in their bedrooms, complete with makeshift capes and kitchen utensils as intimidation props. Professional comedians were performing detailed analyses of classical galactic villain tropes. Two audiences that roared with laughter at every familiar beat. But perhaps most devastating was a video from a human. Military analyst, a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen from the Pentagon, who had created a detailed breakdown of Dominion intimidation tactics for educational purposes. Notice how they rely heavily on atmospheric lighting and voice modulation, she explained to millions of viewers. This is textbook psychological warfare from about 3 centuries ago. It's effective against species that haven't developed entertainment media, but completely ineffective against cultures that have seen these exact same techniques used in fictional contexts. The Chancellor's ancient features contorted with something that might have been pain. They treat us like fiction. Meanwhile, 17,000 light-years away on Earth, Colonel Stevens was standing before the UN Security Council in a briefing room that had been designed for discussions of nuclear war and global terrorism, not for explaining how humanity had accidentally revolutionized galactic politics through the power of comedy. Ladies and gentlemen, Stevens began his PowerPoint presentation, displaying images of rioting crystalline beings and aquatic creatures performing what appeared to be synchronized comedy routines. We've stumbled onto something unprecedented. These aliens have been using fear as their primary tool of conquest for millennia. They're simply not prepared for a species that responds to threats with laughter. Secretary of Defense Patricia Williams leaned forward, her expression intense. She was a woman who had spent her entire career thinking about warfare in terms of missiles and military strategy, not memes and mockery. Colonel, are you suggesting we've accidentally discovered a new form of warfare? Stevens pulled up footage of Korath's increasingly desperate attempts to appear menacing videos that showed the Admiral trying different voice modulators, experimenting with various cape lengths, and even attempting what appeared to be more casual intimidation techniques. No, ma'am. We've discovered something better. We've made them look ridiculous. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't just about Earth anymore. Humanity had inadvertently sparked a galactic revolution simply by refusing to be afraid. Species that had lived under dominion, rule for centuries, were suddenly questioning why they had ever been frightened in the first place. Think about it, Stevens continued. Every empire in history has fallen when its subjects stopped fearing it. The Dominion built their entire power structure on intimidation. But what happens when intimidation becomes entertainment? What happens when fear becomes laughter? The answer was spreading across the galaxy in real time. On world after world, species were beginning to see their oppressors not as terrifying overlords, but as rather sad beings who had become trapped in their own theatrical performance of power. But here's the thing about empires built on fear: they don't go quietly. Into the night. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy showing species beginning to question Dominion authority, the Supreme Chancellor made a decision that would change everything. The humans had shown the galaxy that the Dominion could be mocked. Now, it was time to show the galaxy what happened to those who dared to laugh at the darkness. The real war was about to begin. 3 months after the day that changed galactic history forever, the massive bulk of the Decimator hung peacefully in Earth's orbit, like a reformed bully who had finally learned to make friends instead of enemies. The ship that had once struck terror into the hearts of countless civilizations now bore the cheerful diplomatic flags of the newly formed Galactic Cooperative, a name that had been suggested by a human teenager on social media and somehow stuck through 14 levels of intergalactic bureaucracy. The transformation wasn't just cosmetic. Where once the ship's exterior had been adorned with menacing spikes and threatening weapon arrays, maintenance crews had installed what could only be described as welcoming lights and communication arrays designed for cultural exchange rather than intimidation. It was like watching a Gothic cathedral being converted into a community center. Architecturally impressive, but infinitely more approachable. Inside the United Nations Assembly Hall in New York, a scene was unfolding that would have been pure science fiction just months earlier. The hall that had witnessed decades of human diplomacy now hosted the first intergalactic cultural exchange summit, with beings from 14 different star systems gathered under one roof to discuss everything from trade agreements to comedy. Theory, Admiral Korath, though he insisted people just call him Korath, now stood at the speakers' podium wearing what humans had patiently explained was business casual. Gone was the elaborate armor with its unnecessary spikes and dramatic flourishes. Gone was the flowing cape that had required its own wind machine. Instead, he wore a simple dark suit that had been specially tailored to accommodate his unique physiology, complete with a tie that had been a gift from the human diplomatic corps. The transformation was remarkable. Without the intimidating costume and artificial voice enhancement, Korath looked like what he actually was, a career military. An officer who had spent so long playing a role that he'd forgotten who he was underneath all the theatrical nonsense. His natural voice, it turned out, was actually quite pleasant, deep, and resonant, without needing electronic modification. Rebecca Thompson, bearing the impressive title of Earth's ambassador to galactic affairs, stood before the mixed crowd of humans and aliens with the confidence of someone who had accidentally revolutionized interstellar diplomacy. Her MIT credentials had been supplemented with crash courses in xenopsychology, galactic history, and what she privately called advanced sarcasm management. "The thing about humans," she began, her voice carrying easily through the hall's advanced sound system, "is that we've been telling ourselves scary stories about alien invasions for decades. We've written books, made movies, created entire genres of entertainment around the idea of hostile extraterrestrials coming to conquer us. The audience, a fascinating mix of humans, crystalline beings, aquatic creatures in specialized mobility, suits, and others whose biology defied easy description, listened with rapt attention. This was the woman who had single-handedly dismantled a galactic empire through the power of constructive criticism. After all, when you showed up doing exactly what we expected," Rebecca continued, gesturing toward Korath with a smile, "it was like ... well, like a cover band playing our favorite songs. It's familiar, but not quite right. We'd seen this performance before in every sci-fi movie ever made. The dramatic entrances, the threatening speeches, the unnecessarily complicated costumes. It was all so perfectly predictable that we couldn't help but be amused." A ripple of laughter ran through the assembly, a sound that had become surprisingly common in galactic politics. The Zephyrian delegation produced their harmonic resonance equivalent of chuckling, while the Proximan warriors made a sound that resembled distant thunder, but somehow conveyed mirth. Former Admiral Korath raised his hand, a gesture that months earlier would have been accompanied by dramatic posturing and artificial voice enhancement. Now it was simply a polite request for attention. "Ambassador Thompson, my people are still struggling with the concept of roasting. When the Centaurians called our war fleet trying too hard, what did they mean exactly?" The question hung in the air for a moment before the assembly erupted in laughter. It was a sound that represented something profound, the transformation of fear into friendship, of intimidation into education. It was the former Supreme Commander of Galactic Conquest asking for help understanding why his military strategy had been the subject of intergalactic mockery. "Well, Admiral," Rebecca grinned, using the title with affection rather than formality. "It's what we call advanced diplomacy. When someone says you're trying too hard, they're pointing out that your efforts to appear powerful actually make you seem insecure. It's like, imagine if you met someone who constantly told you how strong and important they were, instead of just demonstrating it through their actions." The explanation sparked a wave of understanding across the alien delegates. This was the kind of cultural exchange that had become the foundation of the new galactic order, not conquest or submission, but genuine communication and mutual learning. Commander Daniel Walsh, now serving as cultural liaison between the former Dominion worlds and the cooperative, leaned over to whisper to his former superior. His insectoid features had relaxed considerably over the past months, and he'd even developed what humans recognized as a sense of humor. "Sir, I've been studying human behavior extensively. I believe what they did to us is called getting owned." Korath nodded solemnly, his expression carrying the weight of someone who had learned a profound lesson about the nature of power and respect. "Indeed, Commander. Indeed." But here's the remarkable thing: this transformation hadn't happened through violence or conquest. It had happened through something far more powerful: the simple act of refusing to be afraid. Humanity had shown the galaxy that the Dominion's power was built on a foundation of psychological manipulation. Once that foundation cracked, the entire structure had peacefully collapsed. The ripple effects had been extraordinary. Species that had lived under Dominion rule for centuries had suddenly rediscovered their own cultures, their own voices, their own capacity for joy. The crystalline beings of Zephyria had developed their first comedy tradition. The aquatic world of Aquatica had created underwater theater. Even the hive-minded collective of Beetlejuice had learned to appreciate individual expression. Of galactic tyranny, Rebecca concluded, looking out at the assembled delegates. It's ended not with a bang, but with a giggle. And that, my friends, is the most human thing of all: finding hope and humor in the darkest places and using that laughter to build bridges instead of walls. The applause that followed was unlike anything the UN Assembly Hall had ever witnessed. It was the sound of a galaxy celebrating its freedom, its diversity, and its newfound ability to find joy in the face of fear. As the delegates began to file out, planning cultural exchanges and collaborative projects, Korath approached Rebecca with something that might have been gratitude in his expression. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you, not just for what you did for the galaxy, but for what you taught me about myself. I had forgotten who I was underneath all that performance." Rebecca smiled, extending her hand in the human gesture of friendship. "Welcome to the neighborhood, Admiral. Welcome to the neighborhood." And so humanity joined the galactic community. Not through conquest or submission, but by teaching the universe's most feared empire that sometimes the most powerful weapon is a really good laugh. The transformation that began with a single moment of human humor had cascaded across the galaxy, proving that small actions, when amplified through connection and understanding, could reshape entire civilizations. The end.